Hello everyone to another episode of Alpine Odyssey. We are going to be working on at least the first pass of the right side here at this kind of new flat ride. It is one of the kind of classic spinning ones. And here to start, I kind of wanted to either keep the main theme the same as the carousel. And so that's why we are building this wooden beam structure to kind of go over just three areas, three armatures to go over the actual three arms of the ride, because I figured that might actually work out. And I ended up scrapping this idea in general, but I decided to leave it in here in case people wanted to, again, see how I work on things that are kind of this mirrored object or round objects in general. And you can see that I, try and copy the one piece around as much as possible so that you are able to get a good size for your original piece. And this original piece here, this one closest to us, is going to be kind of the default blueprint that we work off of. And the reason we copied it around originally was to make sure the edges we're actually going to line up for the rest of the other copies. And so you do this kind of copy and paste and rotation trick so that you're able to see how everything's fitting together, adjust your original in terms of size and how things are clipping potentially down the line. And at that point, everything, when you rotate it as a finished building kind of onto itself, you get a nice clean kind of pasting effect. So that's why I'm leaving this in here. And also, again, to show you guys that I had a little bit of a lack of inspiration in this build, to be honest, and I didn't quite know what I wanted here. I wanted, either wooden elements. I wanted to have a way to interact with the path of some kind. And so I'm sitting here looking at this in different angles, trying to figure out what's going to fit into the background, and then finally kind of gray box in a few squares back there to just kind of rough in the shape, because we need to have tall enough structures in the back just so that it can block the backstage areas, but also potentially block the view from the coaster as well. So we are going to be building a building. It is based off a castle in some location. You guys can go ahead and try and figure out where the main inspiration is for this piece. I think it would be a fun little thing for you to do, and our European friends, I'm sure, might be able to recognize it a lot quicker than others. It's not a direct copy by any means. It is more, I guess, following the aesthetic of that one building and just using that as a base. So what we're doing is making a short wall with a nice, clean, simple guardrail and some simple arches down below. And the overall, I guess, theory for this build is going to be the queue line is going to go into one of the buildings, across one of these open plazas, into another building, and then down and around. So it's actually going to do kind of this nice full loop around the backside, where only part of the time you are exposed to the outside. At this point, we are going to move on to making a tile set from the building, and I'm not using the tile set that we've used throughout the whole series so far. This is kind of making my own custom one, and it is using that rough stone kind of in the background because I think it's kind of the best brick worked building. I know it's not quite bricks, but the default brick in the game, I think, just looks a little too clean and maybe too repetitive. I don't really overall like the aesthetic behind it. I would prefer something a little bit more rustic and maybe a little bit more weathered, you could say. And we're also going to be adding this additional kind of jut coming out in this kind of half semicircle. And it is going to go up the side on both ends of this structure, and it is going to provide a nice little detail, and we'll also have an interesting little dome on top. Today we're going to be building two different types of domes. In fact, the second dome, I think, is probably one of my favorite ones that I've ever made, and it's it's relatively simple, but it's also nicely detailed, so we'll cover that when we get there. But just making sure we have the heavy kind of stones here at the bottom, just to make sure it kind of carries the weight of the building itself, because really, when you take a look at some of these castles, or maybe even a lot of town halls, you find them to be rather barren. Like, they're detailed, yes, and they have very ornate windows and possible wall sections such as the one you're looking at, but a lot of the normal wall sections are a little bit more spaced out. They might have a couple, little trims just dividing up the floors a little bit, and some other minor vertical elements, but overall, they're just a big kind of flat wall of a structure. Here is the first dome, and for this building, I'm looking at first to see if perhaps one of the default domes in the game fit, and of course it doesn't, and so we're going to have to make a custom one. And to do these, of course, you generally start at the center point and kind of rotate it around to get the main spines of the overall kind of shape, and this will help you kind of take a look and make sure everything is going to line up correctly, very similar to what we were doing earlier in the episode. And we are going to hand tile this very much like we have been in a lot of our other buildings, and it is going to be a green roof, kind of that green old copper roof that you might find in old like Victorian buildings, definitely some Dutch buildings for sure, and also Russian buildings. So it does have a European feel, and overall I just like the aesthetic and the color change. We don't use green roofing too much in this section of the park. In fact, behind us by the carousels is the only other structure that's going to have a green roof, so they do kind of stand out a little bit, and I kind of like to keep it that way, at least for now. You never know, we might have more green roof if we want more like mossy kind of overgrown looks in the future. We will complete about half of this nice little semicircle and then simply start copying it over onto the other side. I couldn't directly just spin it all the way around, simply because when we got closer to that wall, that back wall, I kind of stopped caring about necessarily keeping the form completely true, and if I spun that all the way around, it would actually look off and wouldn't have worked. So that's why we are rotating everything kind of bit by bit again, just to make sure things are lining up. This was originally designed to be rotated from the right to the left and then finally kind of merge upon itself. However, starting at that new point kind of messed things up a little bit. I wanted to try and make a kind of our own custom ornate topper for this little spire, but I just don't like these objects. A lot of them don't color too well. They're either too shiny or they just have these extra, pixie dust, you could say, on it, and they're just too distracting of an element, and I wanted something a little bit more solid. So we ended up finding just one of the default spires and working that in, kind of coloring the roof to match the rest of the wooden area. So now we have the two sides of this nice simple compound like building. It's going to build fairly similar to a row home, and it is going to be a pretty quick process. So as soon as you kind of figure out what you're doing, building the tiles and making sure things kind of line up in the long run is the more time consuming aspect, and also of course trying to figure out what you're going to build in the first place and make sure that's going to work. So there's a lot of tests going on off camera that you guys aren't going to see this episode, but it's one of those things where you just have to keep building until eventually it all kind of makes sense. Now, because this whole section to the left here is a little too boring, it doesn't really have a lot of height changes into it and things like that, and it's not really supposed to, so we're just going to add a small little balcony here. And since this is kind of like a town hall castle like element, we are going to have these in case people want to give speeches towards the plaza or things like that. That's essentially what the building would have been used for, and there just happens to be a ride in the plaza of this location, and this is just providing more of a backdrop. We're going to have a single cable going up the side just to give us an extra little vertical element. There are, some power cables or possible, water lines just that can be exposed in these old structures, because it just would have been easier to set them along the edge and just a nice simple kind of U-type metal piece holding it on there, and there you go. It's kind of at that point a solid structure. we get to expand this right side out a little bit. This is kind of the one unique section of the actual building, and it's going to have that extra little flange, and that is to help one tie along the path, and also eventually it'll be worked into the entrance once we get to that point. To me, that's kind of interior work, and you guys know that I do a lot of my interior work during the live streams we do every week. And if you guys want to see some of this stuff built real time, a little bit at a slower pace, and feel free to ask me questions about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it in this way, you are more than welcome to come hang out with us every Sunday at 11:30 Eastern time. So at this point, we need to make a new custom roof. I want to do a slightly different roof. I want these to be more almost like sheets of copper, kind of really long, almost like you would see in like tin roofing. So we are going to do this with the nice solid wooden plank here, and it creates a little bit of a shine to it, and it's also a very smooth surface, so that will work for us also, because we had to make a custom roof simply due to the I guess it is a 6 meter wide tile set. It's not a 4 meter like most buildings are in Planet Coaster, so you are going to run into some areas where you had to really make your own custom pieces like this, and it's part of the fun as well a little bit, because you get to kind of design your own tile set, and designing your own tile set is totally worth it for people who don't quite know exactly what they want to build yet, because what you're doing is instantly expanding what's in the in-game library already and making something yourself. And that's kind of a good way to practice, and then you can kind of combine them in different ways to hopefully make something your own. So at this point, this building is pretty much done. We're just going to move things around, make sure this detaches from the original gray box structure, and then we will actually move it, copy it to the other 3 sides. And holy cow, there's a lot of sirens going on outside. Like, that is super loud. So it's getting louder. Boy. Alright, that's throwing my train of thought off a little bit, but that's okay. I'll keep pushing on. This front middle building, this is going to be the different one, and this is actually going to be the final little bit that we're going to talk about during the speed build, and it's kind of the main detail of this whole triptych kind of asset here. So we want a nice solid, slightly different brick styled column going all the way up this, and it's going to have different windows than the ones that we previously just made. Something actually a little bit more simple and maybe a little bit more defensible as well. And it is going to be kind of this very large, it could be a bell tower, it could be a clock tower technically if I added a clock to it as well. And it is just this nice, really kind of ornate spire at the top. I did look at some of the default ones because they technically do fit at the top there, but I just didn't really like the way they look. I think it has to do a lot with the material, and they're actually a relatively simple shape to look at. And with the rest of the building being as complex as it is, I decided to go ahead and make my own custom topper up here. And we're going to keep this kind of this tin plated kind of structure, so that's why everything is green. So we have this nice color break, and a lot of this was kind of just winging it a little bit just to make sure things worked well enough. And we're still using a lot of the same tricks to get any sort of round kind of structure built here in Planet Coaster, and that's simply have a block in the middle that's tied to the grid, and then whenever you want to rotate it and to make it round, you can go ahead and copy all your pieces plus that one single thing, and you're able to quickly copy and rotate it around to the 90-degree offset. To get the 45s, you kind of have to just copy one set across both sides, and then you kind of get the default center point to actually line up for once. Some large kind of custom arches. We are using a different window to inset in there just because I think it made it look pretty cool. We need to, of course, bring the concrete up a little bit because there are areas where, we get some overhang and some shadow areas that we need to cover up. And then we add this extra little detail just kind of sticking out the top. some gold balls that is actually a pretty neat little detail, and it is going to hold up another section kind of right here above this ring, and will be the kind of top floor, you could say, of the spire itself. And you can already tell this thing's pretty tall. I think it ends up being just a little bit taller than the clock tower on the other side of the plaza. And so you kind of have these dueling towers across both ends kind of competing for space with each other, which is pretty cool. And you never really see them both at once. You're either looking at one or the other, which I think is good as well, because you're not really detracted by these really two tall things simultaneously, and they're not really taking away from anything else. The coaster, of course, we'll probably see them both at the same time, but since you're on a coaster, I think it would be a cool thing to see anyways. And it's actually one of those rare moments, maybe even along the train if you're on the train ride as well. So we're going to do this central kind of smaller spire in the middle here, inside this kind of railing that we set up, and that looks pretty cool as well. I was looking at potentially using, again, some of the default things, but they just don't have any character to them. Like they're almost like base shapes that you can use for more inspiration purposes rather than, in my opinion, actually using them in your build. But you know, if it's up to you, you can use them in different ways. I have before, especially in the actual when did I use those last? I think in the Renaissance Fair Park that we made in Alpha 2, 3? Has it been that long? It feels like it. And now we get some cool columns. I don't think I ended up liking these, so we end up scrapping those and just leaving it kind of plain for now. We're going to inset some windows along the top, just again to give us a little bit of a color break and something to read that we're at the top of the structure before we put the little dome on the topper. Some arches as well, just to help break up the green, because, you know, at some point you can, you know, use the same color too many times, and it's just from a distance kind of helps it make it look a little bit more detailed and simple. So initially I wanted to see if I could copy this dome around and make it work. Here, of course, you can kind of see how it is not a perfect kind of round object, and it was not going to work, and it's also not big enough at all. And this dome is going to take me 2 attempts. I really should have tested this a little bit before, but oh well. This is the things that you run into when you are making these kind of custom toppers anyways, and it's good to kind of explain why this first one didn't work. And it's simply because it got too thin, I think too quickly, and wasn't as big as the rest of the support structure beneath it, and so it just looked a little weak. And you know, at this point, it's basically, as soon as you get the framework done, you can kind of look at the side and check the profile from the left and the right to see if it's going to command enough space at the top, and that one didn't. So we're just going to start over, make this one a little bit more of a gradual slope, and it's a little bit taller as well. And then we get to rotate this off, make our slice of the pie that we're going to be copying around here to make this actual dome function. This is how you make these kinds of things. We'll tile this up quickly enough using some more 1 meter wood pieces. You know, not really caring too much about part clipping here because it's such a far away feature that really you don't notice it when you're down at the bottom. And we are also going to think about adding this additional little top window-esque spire as well, just to give it either some extra height and one extra final detail. So let's go ahead and take a look at it in real time, and you guys can give me some feedback. So here we are taking a look at the first pass over here at this wonderful ride. What's this ride called again? It is called a TriStorm 3. We can rename these things eventually when I actually come up with a good name, but as you guys know, I'm terrible at that. So for now, we're just gonna kind of go skip that. If you guys have something you want to call this, go ahead and leave a comment down below, and I'll take a look. So what we get are these 3 kind of tall buildings, very reminiscent of a possibly an old palace or old college, just split apart here. We're gonna have these lower areas. Now I'm not quite sure if I want these to just be kind of just tall walls with some wooden armatures in here to just break up the boxiness of it all, but we'll see kind of how this kind of plays out. Eventually, I do want to have some fountains out front and some water effects going. I think that would be pretty cool, especially for such a regal area. It's actually the fanciest probably area of the whole European section right here. And I like to have the left and right wings kind of all connected in this nice partial U shape. The proper entrance is going to be this kind of side building here. We'll probably knock out a window, put in a door, and then let the path kind of go into the building itself. Because as you know, throughout this series, it's all about getting into the buildings and letting the guests kind of interact with them in different ways. We have, I guess we can look at some of the closer details. So here is one of the extra little spires that are kind of attached on the side, and it just looks really good, especially from below. It's very imposing, and I like this wall of glass that you get on one side. It's pretty cool looking. Our little balcony with some wrought iron type of kind of decoration going along the edge, some nice solid stonework for the foundation here, so it looks nice and heavy and secure. Here is the little supporting kind of details as well. Some nice vertical elements, arches, little fleur-de-lis type elements due to the top of the doors kind of being exposed there. So it looks a little French. So that looks pretty cool. Some wooden elements as well to make sure that wood beam's looking a little supported. Here is the main central building with that main spire there. Now, I couldn't bump out the spire anymore. I probably would have wanted to, probably another quarter tile, but this ride would have actually started hitting it, and that would have been a no-no. And overall, I think it turned out fine. It's all about capturing the essence of the building, not so much getting it exactly right a lot of the times. Some more of the side elements showing through. Here is the top of the spire and dome. I really like the way this turned out. It's really bulky, and then it gets a little lighter at the top. I'm really one of those builders that likes to build kind of heavy set, bottom heavy structures. I don't really build very kind of thin, wispy lines in a lot of places, and I think it just makes it look very strong and balanced, and definitely a solid structure in general. This left side is pretty much the same. We're also going to be transitioning this building into a little bit. I copied the windows from over here and pasted it onto this structure because this needed some detail. We'll have to put some more supports, but this kind of will have to be tied in as we work into this kind of grass area out here. Put some trees, other probably elements, and just make it look really nice. I also did work here on the stream last week, so you guys get to look at this. We have fully kind of decored around the actual ride and carousel, which looks pretty good, especially from afar. You get a nice plaza feel, and I'm hoping to have somewhat of the same feeling over here on the opposite side. So the park really opens up in this section and gives you a nice break from these crowded streets and stalls into a big open section. And then let's see, I think if we finish this on the live stream this week, or possibly another episode, we can move into the train station and getting these trains somewhat working next episode, and then we'll start working on the coaster after that. So just a few more weeks and we'll be working on our first proper coaster, and then at that point we can move on to our second area, which will be over here. And after I build the second area, we'll probably take a break a little bit from the park itself and start working probably a little bit on the back staging, just to make sure we can start kind of nailing that down. And then we can continue work on everything else. Again, I do want to fill up the whole map itself. There's still so much room to consider, and I hope you guys are ready for this long haul of a project. If you guys are enjoying this kind of stuff, feel free to subscribe if you're new. Go ahead and hit that like button, hop on that train on my channel, and also go ahead and leave a comment down below and tell me what you think. So until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.